On a snowy Christmas Eve, while golden lights danced across the millionaire's mansion, a tiny voice broke a silence that had lasted for 7 long years. A voice that wasn't supposed to exist. A voice that belonged to a little girl who had never spoken a single word since birth. And she said only one thing. She looked up at the nanny, who was packing her small bag to leave forever, and whispered, "Mommy." The word hit the room harder than any storm, because the girl was deaf, and the nanny was not her mother. The moment froze everyone, the guards, the maids, the millionaire standing in the doorway. No one understood how it happened, but nothing about what led to that moment was ordinary. And this is where the story truly begins. Part 1. The Nanny Who Never Belonged. Aria Hale never imagined her life would end up in the mansion of a man like Jonathan Vale, one of the wealthiest CEOs in the city. At 28, she had spent years caring for other people's children, never earning enough to stabilize her own life. But she had a heart that never hardened, no matter how difficult the world became. Aria lived in a tiny attic room of the mansion, paid moderately and often ignored by the wealthy staff, and even more by Jonathan himself. But Aria didn't care. She wasn't there for money or prestige. She was there because of Leora Vale, the little deaf girl who had lost her mother at birth and never spoken a single word. The doctors said she couldn't speak. Jonathan said she wouldn't speak. But Aria believed something entirely different. She believed Leora was simply waiting. Waiting for someone who would listen to the silence she lived in. Part 2. The Child Who Wouldn't Let Go. Leora was 7. Small. Fragile. A wisp of a child with moon-pale skin and eyes too wide for her face. She spent most days drawing on the cold marble floors with colorful chalks. Her drawings were always the same: a tall woman, holding a small child hand, standing under a tree full of lights. Aria didn't understand it at first. "Is that your mother?" she would sign gently. Leora always shook her head. Then she would tap Aria's hand and point at the drawing again. Aria never pushed. She let the child paint her unspoken world. But slowly, quietly, Leora began following Aria everywhere. She clung to her sleeve when she walked, buried her face into Aria's coat when strangers visited, and fell asleep holding her fingers every night. Aria never intended to replace Leora's lost mother. But the child's loneliness built a bridge only love could cross. And Aria crossed it every single day. Part 3. A Father Too Busy to See. Jonathan Vale was a man made of success. Tall, sharp, always dressed in cold colors to match his colder schedule. He loved his daughter, but he did not understand her. He filled her world with therapists, speech trainers, and the best medical teams money could buy. But Leora never responded to any of them. To Jonathan, it felt like failure. To Aria, it felt like misunderstanding. She doesn't need pressure. Aria tried once. She needs connection. Jonathan didn't even look up from his laptop. Connection won't fix a disability. Aria's gaze softened. Love can reach places medicine can't. He paused. Not because he agreed, but because no one had spoken to him like that in years. But the wall around his heart was too thick to let her words in. Part 4. The Decision That Broke Everything. On December 23rd, Jonathan called Aria into his office. She stood nervously as he adjusted his glasses. "Your contract ends tomorrow." Aria nodded. She knew. "I've decided not to renew it." Those words cracked something inside her. Not renew? But Leora. "The new therapist arrives in January," he said flatly. "Leora needs professionals, not emotional dependency." Aria's breath shook. "Dependency," she whispered. "You think love is dependency?" "I think," he said stiffly, "that I can't afford to lose another nanny because my daughter gets too attached." The truth stung. Jonathan wasn't cold. He was afraid. Afraid of letting anyone close. Afraid of being vulnerable again after losing his wife. But his fear would cost Leora, the only person who truly understood her. Aria left the room silently, heart bruised. That night, Leora sensed something was wrong. She kept tugging at Aria's sleeves, tapping her hands, urging her to sit, to play, to stay. And Arya, her own heartbreaking, held her close until the child fell asleep. Part 5. Christmas Eve. The last morning. Snow blanketed the world like a soft white quilt. Lights sparkled on every tree. Carols echoed from faraway homes. Inside the mansion, it was Arya's last day. She packed her small bag, a few clothes, a scarf, the wooden toy Leora had once given her. Her throat tightened as she looked at the sleeping child. Leora didn't know she was leaving. Arya didn't have the courage to tell her. But as she turned to leave the room, she felt a small hand wrap around her wrist. Leora stood there, eyes filled with terror. She tapped her chest, tapped Arya's chest, then shook her head violently.
No.
Don't leave. Arya's heart shattered. She kneeled. Sweetheart, I have to go. Leora refused to let go. Her tiny fingers clutched Arya's coat with desperate strength. Tears streamed down her face, silent but screaming. Arya held her tightly, whispering, "You'll always be in my heart. Always." But Leora suddenly froze. Her breath hitched. Her lips parted. And for the first time in her life,
She spoke.
barely audible,
Cracked.
but unmistakable. Mommy. Arya's entire world stopped.
Her breath.
Her heartbeat. Time itself. "Leora, you spoke," she whispered, trembling. The child nodded desperately, clinging even tighter. Behind them, the doorway creaked. Jonathan stood there, shocked, pale, shaking, because he had heard it too. His deaf daughter had spoken her first word, and she had given that sacred, impossible word to the nanny he was forcing to leave. The moment hit him like lightning. For the first time in years, he understood he'd been wrong. Terribly, painfully wrong. And this, Jonathan Vale had closed billion-dollar deals without blinking, signed contracts that shifted entire industries, and faced boardrooms full of cutthroat executives without breaking a sweat. But nothing left him as stunned as hearing his deaf daughter speak her first word. And the word wasn't daddy. It wasn't hi. It wasn't even a broken sound or accidental whisper. It was a title sacred to every child. A title she had never given anyone. A title she had saved for the woman now kneeling on the rug, trembling with her in her arms. Mommy. Jonathan felt something inside his chest collapse. A wall he had kept standing for years cracked. A truth he had refused to face surfaced. And a fear he had buried for so long finally broke. Part 1. A father realizes the truth. Arya looked at Jonathan with tears streaming down her face, Leora clutched tightly in her arms. She spoke, Arya whispered. She actually spoke. Jonathan swallowed hard, his voice a low, shaken breath. She's never made a sound before. Not once. Leora pressed her cheek into Arya's shoulder, refusing to let go, tiny fingers gripping with all the strength in her small hands. And Jonathan saw something he had refused to see. Leora wasn't attached to Arya because she was dependent. She was attached because Arya was home. Her comfort, her safety, her world. Jonathan stepped closer, but Leora turned her face away and held Arya even tighter. Her message was clear. Don't take her from me. Jonathan's breath broke. For the first time, he understood. He wasn't losing Arya. Leora was. Part 2. The conversation that changed everything. Jonathan motioned for Arya to follow him outside the room. But Leora refused to release her hand. So they walked together, Leora on Arya's hip, her face tucked into her neck. When they reached the quiet living room, Jonathan finally spoke. Arya, I was wrong. Arya blinked, startled. She had never heard him say such words. Jonathan.
No.
Let me say it. He breathed deeply. I thought keeping my distance would protect Leora. Protect me. After my wife died, I closed every door I had. I didn't want anyone else to become irreplaceable. He looked at Leora, so small, so vulnerable, clinging to the only person who ever truly saw her. But you already are, he whispered. Arya's breath hitched. Her heart didn't want to react. But it did. Jonathan continued. I didn't reject your contract because you were inadequate. I rejected it because I was terrified of what would happen if you left after she became attached to you. Arya's eyes softened. You were trying to avoid a heartbreak by causing another. He closed his eyes. I see that now. Silence wrapped the room. Snowflakes drifted outside the large windows. Soft Christmas lights glowed like stars. For the first time, Jonathan wasn't the CEO. He wasn't the millionaire. He wasn't the untouchable businessman. He was just a father who didn't know how to love without fear. Part 3. The twist. Leora signs the truth. Leora suddenly raised her head and looked at Jonathan. Slowly, she reached out her small hand. Her fingers moved clumsily but clearly. Family. Jonathan's face broke. His knees nearly buckled. Family, he whispered. She thinks we're a family. Leora nodded, then pointed at him, then Arya, then hugged both their arms together. Her meaning couldn't be clearer. And it didn't matter that her voice struggled. Her signs were louder than words. She didn't want Arya to be her mother. She believed Arya already was. Jonathan stepped forward, voice shaking. Arya, please stay. Not as an employee, not as a nanny, as someone who belongs here, with us. Arya froze. She had never expected this. Jonathan, what are you saying? That we need you, he whispered. That I need you. Her heart thudded painfully. She didn't want to misinterpret him. But Jonathan took her free hand gently, carefully, as if asking permission from both her and Leora. You brought my daughter back to life, he said softly. You gave her a voice. And you gave me something I didn't realize I had lost, a home full of warmth. His next words were barely a breath. Stay here, as part of our family. Leora looked up at Arya with wide, pleading eyes. And the little girl, the girl who had lived in silence, the girl who had never spoken, whispered again, voice cracking. Mommy, stay. Arya broke. She hugged Leora tightly, crying into her hair. Then she looked at Jonathan with trembling lips. I'll stay, she whispered. If you promise we'll do this together. Jonathan nodded, eyes full of emotion he had never allowed anyone to see. Together, he vowed. Always. Leora clapped her hands with joy, signing rapidly. Family. 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 It was the most beautiful Christmas Jonathan had ever known. Part 4. The Christmas they became a family. That night, the mansion felt different.
Warm. Alive.
Filled with something far richer than money.
Love.
Arya wasn't packing her bags anymore. Jonathan wasn't closing himself off. And Leora. Leora didn't let go of Arya's hand even once. When they sat by the Christmas tree, Jonathan handed Arya a small velvet box. Her breath caught. Jonathan, what? It's not a ring, he smiled softly. Not yet. Inside was a delicate charm. A tiny golden tree, with 2 small figures under it. The same drawing Leora had made again and again. Arya's eyes filled with tears. It's us, she whispered. Jonathan nodded. Now it's real. Leora leaned her head on Arya's shoulder and signed. Our tree. Our family. Arya kissed Leora's forehead. Jonathan leaned closer. And for the first time since he lost his wife, his heart opened fully. Love didn't replace the past, but it built a new future. One where Arya wasn't the help. She was home. White medium star moral of the story. Sometimes the family we dream of isn't found by blood, wealth, or status, but by hearts that choose each other. Love heals in ways medicine cannot. Kindness builds bridges where fear builds walls. And sometimes, the smallest voice can reveal the biggest truth.